Lincoln, Massachusetts is notable for a few reasons. First, it's the home of Ponyhenge, a weird little roadside oddity at the edge of an empty pasture where all the toy horses in town come to die. What brought all these creepy little horsies to the summoning circle is unknown, but it's become an attraction for photographers and legend trippers and spooky bimbos like myself looking for a photo opportunity. There's also a conservation area in Lincoln, ominously named Mount Misery. But despite its grim name, it's apparently a very scenic and not at all miserable place for a hike. And another Lincoln attraction is the Old Town Hill Cemetery, which has some extremely cool old graves and actually holds a special place of fondness in my heart. Because one time when I was there just taking pictures of the old headstones, some creep rode by in a pickup truck and tried to catcall me out the window. And as he's screaming at me, he crashed his overcompensation mobile directly into a mailbox. It was just like a beautiful moment between me and the dead, you know what I mean? There's something else that draws me back to Lincoln again and again. To drive the rural roads like I might spot some clue between the suburban houses and empty pastures, between dense trees and historic landmarks. But after more than 60 years, there have never been any answers to the mystery that haunts Lincoln, the eerie disappearance of Joan Risch. Joan Carolyn Bard was born May 12, 1930, in Brooklyn, New York. Her family settled in New Jersey, but when Joan was only 9 years old, her parents were killed in what would be described as a suspicious house fire. Joan's childhood, both before and after the fire, was reportedly an unhappy one. Later in life, it was revealed that Joan confided in the people close to her that she had been sexually abused as a child, though the identity of her abuser is unknown. But after the mysterious fire that killed her family, Joan was adopted by a relative, and she changed her last name to Natris, dropping the surname that she had shared with her deceased parents. Joan was a bright student and went on to attend Wilson College in Chambersville, Pennsylvania. And after graduating with a degree in English literature, Joan went on to do what only the bravest and boldest bookworms dare to try. She went into publishing. Claps for Joan. You're a baddie, Joan. And Joan was driven. Though she started off as a secretary at Harcourt, which at the time was a major publisher, Joan soon moved up to supervise the entire secretarial pool, and eventually became an editorial assistant, which was no easy feat for a woman in publishing at that time. No easy feat for a woman in publishing at any time. Joan eventually moved from Harcourt to another publisher, where she also worked as an editorial assistant. Meanwhile, one of Joan's roommates set her up on a date with a man named Martin Risch, a date which apparently went very well. Joan and Martin were smitten, but Martin was located in Massachusetts and Joan in New York City, and Joan, continuing to pursue her publishing career, refused to leave New York. So the pair dated long distance for about 2 years, until they finally got married the day after Christmas in 1955. After 2 years of wedded bliss, during which Joan continued to work as an editorial assistant, Joan got pregnant, and she left her job in publishing shortly before her daughter Lillian was born. And this is what was expected of women at the time, though whether it's what Joan really wanted, we'll never know. But Joan and Martin had Lillian in 1958, and then a son, David, in 1959. The family lived for a time in Connecticut before moving to Lincoln, Massachusetts in 1961. And the Risches apparently settled in nicely in suburban Lincoln, with Martin taking a job at the Fitchburg Paper Company while Joan stayed home with the children. And while Joan kept a beautiful home and took excellent care of her 2 children, she was more than just a housewife. She was a prolific gardener and a frequent visitor to the town library, as well as being an active member of the local League of Women Voters. People who knew Joan said that she was thoughtful, quiet, and remarkably intelligent, with loads of personality once you got to know her. And as such, she made quite a few friends in Lincoln, including her neighbor, Barbara Barker, who also might just be the last person to see Joan Risch alive. On the morning of October 24, 1961, Martin Risch woke up early to catch an 8 a.m. flight to New York for a planned business trip that would keep him in Manhattan overnight. According to Martin's later testimony, Joan was up when he left, and he was on the road by 6:50 a.m., headed to Logan Airport. It's assumed that Joan then got the children up and dressed and fed them breakfast. Around 9:20 a.m., Joan received a call from a friend, but the call was brief because Joan reported that she was late for a dentist appointment. At around 9:30, Joan dropped baby David off at her friend Barbara Barker's house, and then she took Lillian with her to her dentist appointment in nearby Bedford. During this appointment, Joan got a cavity filled, and according to her dentist, there was nothing in Joan's demeanor that indicated that she was worried or depressed about anything. Joan made a follow-up appointment for the next week before leaving with Lillian to run a few more errands. Joan went shopping, purchasing some clothes for herself and her son before stopping at a supermarket. It was noted in the police reports that Joan had done a major shopping trip the day before, purchasing $16 in groceries, which is equal to about $150 today in our dystopian capitalist hellscape. But Joan might have had to stop for a few more things before ultimately returning home at 10:55 a.m. In the meantime, the mailman had come by to drop off some mail, as well as the garbage man and the milkman, who all noticed nothing amiss at the Risch house. Joan went over to Barbara Barker's house to pick up David around 11 a.m. According to Barbara, Joan was in good spirits. They chatted for a bit before Joan headed home. An employee for a local dry cleaners came by the house, and the employee that was picking up the garments that the Risches were having dry cleaned was in the house for about 5 minutes, and also reported that nothing was amiss. Around 1:20 p.m., Barbara Barker watched from her property as her son Douglas went over to the Risches to play with Lillian in the driveway. It's unknown what Joan was doing in the meantime, but around 1:55, Joan walked Lillian and Douglas over to Barbara's property. She told Lillian that she would be back shortly, so the kids kept playing at Barbara's house. Less than 20 minutes later, Barbara looked out her window and spotted Joan running up her driveway in a trench coat. Barbara later said, "I saw her run beside her car. I saw something red. I thought she was chasing a child, and the child was wearing a red jacket. She was running with her arms outstretched." This sighting, around 2:15 p.m., is the last ever confirmed sighting of Joan Risch. Eventually, when Joan didn't return to collect Lillian, Barbara Barker walked her back over to the Risch property. Barbara then took her own children shopping and returned home sometime after 4 p.m. But when Barbara got home, Lillian returned to Barbara's house, and she told Barbara, "Mommy is gone, and the kitchen is covered in red paint." Well, Barbara wasted no time getting over to the Risch's house, and upon entering the home, Barbara discovered a shocking scene in the kitchen. Blood spattered the walls and was streaked across the floor. Smeared bloody handprints led from the kitchen into David's nursery, where the toddler lay crying in his crib, unharmed but clearly distressed. Barbara collected David and fetched a neighbor, who helped search the home. But Joan was nowhere to be found, and minutes later, Barbara called the police. When the police arrived, they quickly surveyed the scene. Reports show that the walls and floor of the kitchen were streaked with smears of blood, and a wad of discarded paper towels on the floor indicate that someone may have tried to clean up some of the blood before ultimately abandoning the task. There were blood drops upstairs, mainly in the master bedroom. There was also a blood trail leading outside from the kitchen, with more bloody handprints smeared across the trunk of Joan's car. The handset of the wall-mounted telephone in the kitchen was ripped off and thrown in the trash bin, which was also out of place, left in the middle of the kitchen floor instead of its usual place under the sink. Along with the phone, the trash contained an empty liquor bottle and several empty beer bottles. Later, Martin Risch would tell investigators that he and Joan had finished the bottle of liquor together the night before, but he couldn't account for the beer bottles, which he said were not a brand familiar to him or his wife. A side table in the hall was turned over, and several items were scattered across the floor. A phone book was found open to the page where emergency numbers were listed. Nothing was stolen from the house, and Joan's purse was found tucked in the closet, untouched. An immediate police search was launched, combing the area for any sign of Joan, who the police believed had been abducted in a violent struggle. As news of Joan's disappearance spread, several witnesses came forward, with claims that they'd seen a woman matching Joan's description in the hours since Barbara's last confirmed sighting of her. That so eerie in retrospect sighting of Joan running up the driveway with something red in her hands. Several witnesses called in to say that they had seen a woman matching Joan's description walking along Route 128 in Waltham, near the Cambridge Reservoir. Investigators searched the water there, but nothing turned up. Another witness claimed to have seen Joan walking along the side of Route 2A, about 200 yards from the Risch home. She was wearing a gray trench coat similar to Joan's, and according to the witness, had a handkerchief tied under her chin in a peculiar fashion, as if she was trying to hide her face. The caller described Joan's movements as being strange enough to make the sighting very memorable to them, because they said that Joan was shuffling along the side of the road, hunched over and clutching herself as if she were cold. The final possible sighting of Joan is perhaps the most chilling. A caller claimed to have seen a woman matching Joan's description walking along the side of Route 128 in a daze, with blood running down both of her legs. The caller said that the woman was walking in a plodding manner, with her head bowed down. Investigators searched all these areas, but never found any clues that might shed light on Joan's disappearance. And as the investigation continued, the plot seemed to thicken. It seemed that in the months leading up to her disappearance, Joan had been on a bit of a mystery kick, checking out dozens of books about murder and disappearances from her local library. And looking at her reading history, detectives began to wonder if perhaps Joan might have had a mind to stage her own disappearance as a way to escape the doldrums of her suburban housewife life. This is genuinely like a huge fear of mine, because like if I ever go missing, like being super into true crime, the cops are gonna be like, well, she was into this stuff. Like, that somehow makes me likely to stage a crime scene? I'm not into this stuff because I want to go missing, bro. I'm into this stuff because I'm so fucking scared of going missing that I think that obsessively reading about unsolved disappearances and murders will make me somehow more mentally prepared to deal with some deranged psycho if I ever do get kidnapped. Like, if I have some kind of mental roster of all the different kinds of killers and scenarios, I'll somehow have a better chance of surviving. So, here's my official notice. If I ever go missing, I'm missing, okay? I have no reason to fake my own death. Or is that what I want you to think? Of particular interest to the investigators was one book that Joan had checked out from the library titled Into Thin Air. No, not the John Krakauer one about Mount Everest. This book was instead a mystery novel that was kind of like the original Gone Girl, about a woman who staged a crime scene to make it look like she disappeared by planting her own blood in her home before disappearing. Theories emerged that Joan may have wanted to disappear, that she planned to stage her own death so that she could run away and start a new life without her husband and kids. But this wasn't the only theory that emerged that seemed to paint Joan in a negative light according to the standards of the day, because there were two other theories held by investigators in Joan's case that both made them unsympathetic to Joan's situation. One theory was, of course, botched abortion. The thought was that Joan might have never wanted her kids to begin with. So when she realized that she was pregnant with a third child, she sought the help of a black market abortionist, which was a dangerous undertaking that resulted in many deaths in the time before Roe, and probably will again now that we're regressing into the Dark Ages. The idea here is that Joan may have drank those beers at the direction of the abortionist to relax her for the procedure, and that after something went wrong, Joan began to bleed out. The abortionist prevented her from calling for help. And though Joan might have been able to escape long enough to be seen walking on the side of the road with blood running down her legs, she was ultimately apprehended and her body was disposed of. This theory was closely linked with another one commonly held by investigators in Joan's case, which is that Joan might have been having an affair, and that either she died as a result of a botched abortion after becoming pregnant with her affair partner's baby, or her side piece offed her in a murderous rage. According to the milkman who visited the Risch home on the daily, he'd spotted a strange, dirty, two-tone vehicle in the Risch driveway a couple days before her disappearance. And a local girl getting off the school bus on the day of Joan's disappearance said that she saw a similar car in the Risch driveway that afternoon. Investigators wondered if this car might have belonged to a man that Joan was cheating on her husband with, and if this man might have had a mind to kill Joan for one reason or another. I swear, no imagination on these guys, huh? And there were other theories, of course. Martin supposed that his wife had some kind of household accident, and that she was struck with amnesia after hitting her head. He thought perhaps that she wandered off in her confusion and would turn up when her memory returned to her. In fact, Martin remained in the home that he had shared with Joan for 15 years, and he refused to disconnect the landline or change his number, even though the home was frequently the victim of prank calls and predatory psychics trying to scam the family. But he kept that number, just in case Joan ever recovered her memory or escaped her captors and was able to call home. But eventually the Risch property was purchased by the National Park Service, and Martin moved out, but never moved on. He never had Joan declared legally dead, and he never remarried. Martin Risch eventually died without any answers about what had happened that day, still believing that Joan might be alive somewhere. So, you might be wondering, what do I think happened? And I think that the reason why this case haunts me so much is because I really have no idea. I think it's possible that a complicated woman like Joan might have had secrets that she kept from her husband and friends. When I look at the details of her life and how driven she was to make it in publishing, I really wonder if she was fully satisfied with life as a suburban housewife. I don't believe that she faked her own disappearance. Nothing about Joan indicates that she'd potentially leave her kids to harm, abandoning David with a dirty diaper in his crib and leaving Lillian unattended outside. If anything, I think it's possible that Joan might have had an affair or had some friends who were not quite of the shiny white picket fence suburban status of her other acquaintances. Maybe she enjoyed the company of people who were more artistic and bohemian than her other housewife friends. But she kept these friendships more secret, close to the chest. And if these friendships had something to do with her disappearance, either by accident or on purpose, no one would ever know about them, because Joan would have taken that secret to the grave. Or maybe it wasn't someone that Joan knew at all. Maybe Joan was the fixation of an unknown stalker. Maybe someone was watching the home and knew Joan's husband was gone for the day. The crime scene almost seems to imply a kind of push and pull, as if the attacker might have allowed Joan some moments of autonomy. Picture this. Joan's home is invaded by someone with an intent to do her harm. Maybe it's someone she knows and she lets him in. Maybe it's a stranger who's watched her from afar. Maybe Joan knew something was off and maybe she didn't, but this person eventually brought Joan to unease. Yet, she didn't make any sudden movements. Her daughter was right outside, playing in the driveway. She could see her through the window. The last thing she'd want to do is cause a scene that might bring her daughter in from outside directly into this person's path. In this scenario, I imagine that the attacker might be running hot and cold. One moment drinking beers in Joan's kitchen and talking to her, the next attacking her. One moment allowing her to leave the room long enough to open up the phone book to the page with emergency numbers, and then the next ripping the phone off the hook. Joan was smart and may have done her best to placate her attacker, to keep him calm and keep him from hurting her, but she also wanted to escape. And if the sightings of Joan on the side of the road are accurate, maybe she did escape for a time. But whoever was after her did find her. And the next time he had Joan in his clutches, he didn't let go. I don't know, this one just eats me up because I think it's possible that anything happened here. In any case where they never find the body, the mystery just seems so wide open. There's just enough clues here to paint a scene, but there's so much missing, so much unknown. All the hours that Joan spent at home alone, her husband gone, and the trees like a shroud of secrecy between her house and the neighbors. It feels like there are so many unknown plot lines that could have been playing out in the privacy of Joan's housewife isolation. I don't know, what do you think? Definitely give me your theories. And I also just want to shout out my friend Bill Malone, who gave us a lot of the photos for this episode. Check out more of his work. I'll include a link in the description. He has an amazing new photo book coming out, and the ominous vibe captured in these photos just absolutely suits an area that is haunted by a mystery that will never be solved.